In 1983, cryptozoologist Loren Coleman published his book, Mysterious America. In it, he described a 200-square-mile region in southeastern Massachusetts with a long history of strange, paranormal, and sometimes sinister activity. He called the region the Bridgewater Triangle. In Massachusetts, there is an area known for having an unusually high volume of strange occurrences, unexplained mysteries, and frightening evidence of evil activities, from ghostly hauntings and cryptic animal sightings.
I saw what I saw. I reported what I saw.
You got to see this, you know? I'm not going to believe this.
I was scared.
To UFO encounters.
I seen something that wasn't from this world.
They seemed almost as if they wanted us to see them.
It looked like a baseball home plate, and there were a series of lights on it.
And evidence of satanic ritual sacrifice.
They cut the head off.
They believed that they could gain power by drinking from the skull.
The Bridgewater Triangle is one of the world's most diverse hotspots for paranormal activity. The triangle's borders are revealed by connecting the dots between the town of Abington to the north, the town of Freetown to the southeast, and the town of Rehoboth to the southwest.
Living in Massachusetts and being into the unusual, you hear about the Bridgewater Triangle. It's one of those places that come up again and again when people find out you're into this strange stuff. It's an amazing place. It's beautiful, but it's also legendary.
Around 1996, I first heard about the Bridgewater Triangle and started conducting investigations there, at first focusing just on the UFO sightings. Over time, I began to realize that all the paranormal phenomena that were being reported in the Bridgewater Triangle, the Bigfoot sightings, the cattle mutilations, even the hauntings, everything, was all related and part of the same thing.
The root cause for paranormal activity in the Bridgewater Triangle is widely debated. But legend has it that King Philip's War, an uprising of the Wampanoag tribe that ultimately ended with the death of Chief Metacomet, and the murder and enslavement of his people, is to blame for the negative energy in the region.
When King Philip was captured, he was drawn and quartered and beheaded, much as the tradition was with the English. His head was put on a pike, and it was actually kept there in front of Fort Plymouth for 20 years.
This gruesome piece of history may have given birth to the legend, and whether it's true or not, believers point to the epicenter of the triangle, the Hockomock Swamp, as the place where most of the activity originates. In the hundreds of years since King Philip's War, the swamp has spawned strange reports of ape-like bipeds, enormous birds, snakes the size of stovepipes, giant cats, and ravenous red-eyed dogs. Renowned cryptozoologist Loren Coleman has been researching and investigating cryptozoological mysteries since 1960.
In 1975, I moved from California to Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I started picking up on this whole notion that there was an area in southeast Massachusetts that almost was a magnet of weird phenomena. And because of the three Bridgewaters, there was already a hint that there was a triangle in the area. And I started looking and plotting different sightings, different incidents on a map, and really noticed it was a triangle.
Of all the creatures said to inhabit the Hockomock Swamp region, none are more often seen or encountered than Bigfoot.
In 1970, you had a coalition of local police and state police tracking down and following what they thought was a bear. But the more and more I talked to the individuals involved, it seemed like it was a very unusual bear, a bear that sometimes would go upright, sometimes run on all fours. It was a classic Bigfoot case. There was an officer that I interviewed who told me in no uncertain terms that a Bigfoot had come to the back of his cruiser and lifted it up. He was scared to death, and those kinds of reports kept coming in.
Bigfoot has also been reportedly spotted near two small ponds in Bridgewater known as Claybanks 1 and Claybanks 2. Bridgewater resident Joseph DeAndrade claims to have seen the elusive creature in the forest surrounding Claybanks 2.
In the winter of '78, this guy Wayne and I, we agreed to go out and, check out this wooded area because, this other guy, he's half Indian. He's talked to me about Sasquatch. I told Wayne, I said, let's go over there, maybe find some footprints. When we reached the spot, we had our backs turned to the pond, and then suddenly, as we stood there together, something told me to turn around and look. And I said, I want to make it clear I don't go around hearing voices all the time. So I said to myself, I said, why? And then the voice said, turn around and you will see. So I said, well, right, so I'll turn around and look. When I turned around and looked, I saw something that I'll never forget for the rest of my life. I saw what appeared to be the Sasquatch creature that I heard about. It had long, dark brown hair all over its body, and I saw it from the waist up, but I didn't see the face. It was walking slowly down the hill over there. I went over to Wayne, and I said, Wayne, will you please look? You got to see this, I'm not going to believe this, So I turned around again to look, and it was gone. I never saw it again.
After his alleged encounter with the giant ape, DeAndrade founded the Bridgewater Triangle Expedition Team. The BTET led several expeditions into the region armed with rifles and cameras, but never again saw Bigfoot.
When I saw that creature, I believe it was meant to be because something wanted me to see it. Therefore, something eventually wanted me to investigate this triangle area.
Another strange creature sighting in the triangle are gigantic raptors, known as thunderbirds. In 1971, Norton Police Sergeant Thomas Downey claimed to have seen a large bird with a 12-foot wingspan while traveling along Winter Street in nearby Mansfield, a town just west of the Bridgewater Triangle and the Hockomock Swamp.
Officer Downey had been coming along the road and he saw this creature, 6 feet tall or so, large wings, slowly just lifted right into the air. And this was an intriguing sighting because it overlapped with a lot of reports that we were hearing about Mothman, about Thunderbirds.
Ironically, Downey's sighting occurred in an area known as Bird Hill.
I was confused if the Bird Hill was named because of his sighting or that had always been called Bird Hill. Certainly Officer Downey being placed in the middle of having an encounter there just reinforced for me the strangeness of the Bridgewater Triangle.
In the years following his initial report, Downey refused multiple requests for interviews concerning his encounter. Another series of strange sightings in the Bridgewater Triangle involving what Coleman dubbed the Mansfield Mystery Cat occurred in towns surrounding the Hockomock Swamp region. In March of 1993, a large tan cat resembling a mountain lion was frequently reported in the towns of Easton and Mansfield. Presumed by some to be an escaped exotic pet, the origins of the Mansfield Mystery Cat remain unclear.
There were other reports that weren't so specific of people seeing both the yellow-colored cats and the black panthers in the area. And those interested me that sometimes people were seeing them at the same time.
In May of 1993, the headless carcass of an African serval was found near the Easton-Raynham town line. Despite the discovery, police were quick to dismiss the 30-pound spotted serval as the source of the large cat sightings. Like its origins, the fate of the Mansfield Mystery Cat remains a mystery. In the Bridgewater Triangle of Massachusetts, there are intriguing reports of cryptic animal sightings. In 1990, William Russo had an up-close and personal encounter near the Hockomock Swamp that he will never forget.
Back at the late 1980s to about the mid-1990s, I was working a 3 to midnight shift in the town of Raynham where I lived, and that's where my strange happening occurred. When I got off work, every night at midnight, I'd walk my dog, Samantha. She was a Rottweiler Shepherd mix, big, around 90 pounds. Now, usually we walked on the sidewalks towards the center of town. But on this particular night, we walked a different route. I don't really know why, but we did. Right behind my house is an area we called the high T's, claimed by the electric company. They run those high-tension wires. It's about 50 feet across and overgrown with 100-foot pines, so it's kind of like a route for kids who want to take shortcuts and who knows what kind of wildlife during the day, and at night, maybe stranger things. I went perhaps a half a mile when I came to an old water wheel that ran an early ironworks back a couple of hundred years ago. And there's a street light at this road, and the street light casts a big circle of light right in the middle of the street, about a 10-foot radius. So as I approached the road, all of a sudden, Sammy, my dog, started to pull at the leash, and I looked down and she was quivering, she was shaking, she was rattling like an old Chevy. And then a few moments later, I heard what was scaring the dog. It was a high-pitched, almost a wail, and it went like this. It went, "I want you. I want you. Here. Here. I want you." Now the hairs on the back of my neck started to go up, and Sammy, of course, she was just absolutely in terror. And suddenly, I saw something walk. It was erect, standing straight up. It walked into the middle of that circle of light that was cast by the street lamp. It was about 3 or 4 feet tall. It had a pot belly. And as I walked a little closer, I saw that it wasn't clothed. It had hair that was maybe 3 or 4 inches long, totally covered in hair. It had eyes that were perhaps a little big for its head, but not hugely disproportionate. The face perhaps looked like the chipmunk. At first I thought it was a child, but as I analyzed it, I thought it was in the beginning stages of old age. I don't think it was young. Whatever it wasn't young. But it was speaking, I mean, it definitely speaking, and it kept saying, "I want you, I want you," got more insistent, and it started beckoning me. "Here, here, I want you." It wasn't threatening me, but what was weird, it wasn't advancing to me. It didn't come near me. It wanted to get me in its space. This is what I felt like. I wish I could say that I was brave enough to go right up and, you know, get that close from it, but I couldn't. I was scared. And my Samantha was scared, so we turned around and we walked home pretty fast. And I stayed up the whole night analyzing, what could this be? What could this be? And here's what I think it was saying. My best guess is, "I want you" is, "We want you. We want you. Here, here, come here, come here." I think it was speaking English. I rarely told anyone about it. I didn't know at the time the stories about the Bridgewater Triangle. I've never seen anything paranormal. I just didn't feel like sharing the story, but, you know, that was almost 20 years ago. And I'm getting up in age, and I felt I should pass it along, so I wrote a little internet blog on it, and I want to share it. I want people to know about it. I went back many times and never again saw it.
Just north of William Russo's sighting near the Hockomock Swamp lies the Raynham-Taunton dog track. The location is known for a high level of reported paranormal activity, including frequently reported sightings of unexplained spook lights.
So spook lights are seen moving down the old railroad tracks, glowing balls of light moving up and down. Some would say it's swamp gas. Others say it's spirit energy moving. Glowing balls of light that seem to have some intelligence to it.
James Michael Rice had his own experience with the spook lights of the Bridgewater Triangle.
My friends and I, we spent a great deal of time in and around the swamp. We were actually out in the woods at night on what we used to refer to as an Indian bridge on Elm Street in Bridgewater. At some point in time, one of us noticed what we thought was a canoe coming down the river, and we just sort of assumed that maybe it was a hunter with a lantern or just some people out fishing at night. And eventually these lights just entered this clearing, and there was no canoe, there were no hunters, it was just these balls of light about the size of baseballs. We didn't quite know what to make of it, so we started sort of shouting out the colors to make sure we were seeing the same thing, and we were. They were changing different colors, blues and reds and oranges. At some point in time, the lights just kind of started spinning around, skimming off the water. They seemed to be sentient, they seemed to be playing, they seemed almost as if they wanted us to see them. And then after a few minutes, they grew fainter and fainter and went back upstream from the direction they originated from. To this day, I don't have an explanation for it. I just sort of appreciate the fact that I was able to experience it.
Paranormal activity has been reported throughout the entire 200-square-mile region of the Bridgewater Triangle. Most often, it is reports of unidentified flying objects, or UFOs, that top the list of the unexplained.
The 1970s in particular were a time of very high UFO activity in the Bridgewater Triangle. There were sightings along Route 44, in Raynham, in Taunton, very, very often.
In the spring of 1979, former WHDH reporters Jerry Lopes and Steve Sprasia claimed to have witnessed what is arguably the most famous UFO sighting to occur within the Bridgewater Triangle.
Jerry Lopes and I worked at WHDH Radio, and we were heading down to the Raynham dog track, and when we got off 24 onto 106, I noticed this really bright light over the tree line, and the light was coming closer and closer and getting bigger and bigger. And I remember saying to Jerry, "What is that over there?" So we pulled his vehicle over, and all of a sudden the stars blotted out in the shape of an arrow as this thing passed overhead.
Ironically, I'm a big baseball fan, it looked like a baseball home plate, and there were a series of lights on it.
And it was very, very wide. Perhaps the width of now, we'd say 5 747s wing to wing.
It looked like it had a little cord or something hanging off it, and sparks were coming off of it. I almost felt like I could throw a rock at the thing. It seemed that close to me.
This was pretty much the shape of it. And this thing passed overhead like this. For me, what first attracted me was this light that kind of came into our field of vision, just like that. And as this thing passed overhead, it just kept coming and coming and coming. And the light kept getting bigger and bigger.
I'm an Air Force veteran. I've been in the Air Force for 4.5 years. I've been around a number of different planes, and I said to Steve, that's not one of ours. And it just hovered there for a minute. It looked like it was over a little bit of a field, and the next thing you know, it just kind of took off.
We continued on to the dog track, and most of the conversation that evening was, what did we see? Up to that point, I had been 100% skeptic. I thought anybody who ever saw these things, they were either crazy or publicity hounds, or there was just something wrong with them in their head altogether. What I didn't realize at the time was that a lot more people had seen it than just Jerry and I.
Interestingly, over the course of the next week, there were a series of spottings, different sightings. It was reported in the papers, reported on the radio station, and at that point, Steve and I decided to come forward and say, hey, we actually saw something.
A couple of days later, an article appears in the Brockton Enterprise. And not only does it have interviews with Jerry and I, but quite a number of other folks in and around the Randolph area who had seen it. But they've got the staff artists take all of our recollections and put together a drawing, an artist rendition, which looked pretty much like this. And it's like, whoa. I keep looking up because even to this day, as I look up, I can imagine I can see the darn thing. It made that much of an impression on me.
I saw what I saw, I reported what I saw, and I moved on.
And there was another witness, too, 17-year-old Ron Baker. Now, 36 years later, he recounts his experience. The craft shared a number of physical characteristics with the UFO reported by Jerry Lopes and Steve Sprasia.
At the time, I was working at the steakhouse on 138 in Southeastern. It was an early night, about 8:30, 9 o'clock. Pulled out to the parking lot, and I saw in the sky this big dark shadow, wedge shape or triangle shape, and it was moving very, very slow. It was about 300 feet in the air. It was about the size of I would say 2 football fields. And as it passed overhead, I could hear an engine at the back or a humming noise. I really don't know what it was.
For me, as a UFO investigator in the Bridgewater Triangle, it was like every time I would come here and investigate a sighting, there would be leads for other sightings.
One lead came from Derek Holt in March of 2011. He witnessed a UFO above the skies of Raynham. Unlike other UFO witnesses within the Bridgewater Triangle, Holt captured video footage of his sighting.
I first started seeing these orbs in the sky, would stare at them and try to really see them, and I couldn't really picture them with my own eyesight. I actually bought a small little camera, and I started filming them. I caught one here at the dog track. I'd say probably directly above me. I don't know how high. It would flash blue, red, green, pulsating lights, and I captured one of them at Prospect Hill in Rainham. I was at my friend's house, and I seen one of the orbs, and then it would be a bright, bright light, and then it would turn into like a plane and fly off. I still to this day know I seen something that wasn't from this world.
Outside the realm of UFOs and cryptic animals, the Bridgewater Triangle also includes several locations that are directly related to baffling mysteries associated with Native American history. One such site is Anawan Rock, where in the closing days of King Philip's War, the last band of Wampanoag warriors led by Chief Anawan finally surrendered. Today, Native American spirits are said to haunt Anawan Rock.
People visiting the rock have heard the sounds of people speaking Algonquin. There's also been the sound of drums beating. People have even reported phantom fires. People describe them as giving off no heat, no smell, no smoke, usually seen in back of the rock toward the swamp side. I myself have done some investigations at the rock around the anniversary of the surrender. I was with a colleague, Matthew Moniz, a few nights after the anniversary. We did witness what looked like shimmering campfire off in the swamp. There was no logical explanation for this light. Matthew Moniz and I witnessed this several times over a good 3 to 4 minute period, and then it stopped. I've also, with Matt that night, experienced what felt like an intense cold spot on a very warm August night walk in between the two of us. And I found it interesting that later I've been told by 2 witnesses who have seen the apparition of an elderly Native American man standing up on that part of the rock.
One of the greatest paranormal experiences that I've ever had in my life occurred at Anawan Rock. We'd been investigating for probably a couple of hours, and I had my camera in my hand, and as I turned around, I met the eyes of an older man. He was misty gray, and I could see right through him. I could see the tree behind him, and it was like my eyes met his eyes, and you could see that there was a person in there, a conscious person who had feelings, and I actually do believe that it was Anawan. I suddenly realized, oh my God, I'm standing here looking at an apparition and I have a camera in my hand. So for the 1 second that I looked down to the camera, make sure it's on, and then looked up to try and grab this picture of him, he was already gone. It's an honor to meet the spirit of a man who experienced that was there those last days. And we actually feel terribly for him because he believed when he surrendered that he was leading the people to freedom. Benjamin Church had promised him that the people would be okay if they just surrendered and went to Plymouth. And we all know Benjamin Church left for a few days, came back, and by then it was too late. Anawan's head was on a pike for 20 years.
At Anawan Rock, aside from being one of the most active places, is the idea of the wampum belt. Philip gave the wampum belt, which was the physical representation of the narrative of the Wampanoag people, their history. He gave it to Anawan. And then when Benjamin Church agreed to the surrender, he took the belt, and it kind of disappears from all recorded record. And a lot of people feel that the hauntings and the weirdness that's in the Bridgewater Triangle, the weirdness at Anawan Rock, will happen until the wampum belt is returned.
Native American spirits are not the only reported hauntings in this part of the Bridgewater Triangle.
Palmer River Burial Ground, located on Lake Street, was one of the earliest meeting houses of Rehoboth. People report seeing balls of light moving about the cemetery. One of the most common specters of the cemetery is a colonial soldier. He was described once as looking as if he was out of sync with his surroundings as he walked along the tombstones, running his fingers along the tops of them before he faded away. 2 colleagues of mine who were not aware of each other on 2 separate occasions did EVP sessions in the cemetery. One investigator got what sounded like a woman dancing around her, just saying la, 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 la. And she found it very interesting because at the time she made the recording, there was absolutely no ambient sound.
It's all right for you to do that. It's all right for you to do that.
Well, the other investigator I knew was there in the middle of the afternoon, but he left his recorder going as he was leaving the cemetery and caught a woman singing, "You won't let me know your love for me." And it sounds very much like an old tavern song. So we have dubbed her the Singing Lady of Palmer River.
In the northern portion of the Triangle, the town of East Bridgewater boasts many haunted locations.
One of the more interesting investigations that I've done with my group, East Bridgewater's Most Haunted, was a house on North Central Street in East Bridgewater. It's a historical home and date back to the early 1800s, I believe, a member of the Keith family.
While we were in there, one of the investigators was upstairs, Ann Kerrigan, and she smelled roses, which is one of the things that the family said that they could smell.
That perfume hit me full in the face, like someone was standing there wearing it.
And as she was explaining this, I had microphones set up in a mixing board and everything. I had the whole house recording. This gunshot rang out.
Stairs, I smelled roses. Yep. Like that. Now, I just peeked in whoever's room is to the right. Yeah, that's you have a big candle on the bureau? Yeah.
It just went right over my voice, not heard by anybody who was in the room.
When you play that back and you play that, it's absolutely amazing, this loud gunshot. You can even hear it reverberate in the room. It's really a tremendous, tremendous recording. One of my favorites.
Stairs, I smelled roses. Yep. Like that. Now, I just peeked in whoever's room is to the right. Yeah, that's you have a big candle on the bureau, but it's grapefruit or something.
In the southern area of the Bridgewater Triangle lies the Freetown State Forest, a hotbed of sinister activity. But unlike other locations within the Triangle, the Freetown State Forest has seen a disproportionate amount of criminal activity. Some paranormal researchers point to a negative energy within the forest which has attracted a sinister human element.
I think a lot of the criminal activity that happens in Freetown is directly related to the Bridgewater Triangle, whether it is caused by the Triangle or whether or not the Triangle is the result of whatever predates that. It's not a surprise to me that all this crime takes place here because it's just a darker place.
During the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, rumors of a cult operating within the forest spread fear through the local community. Evidence of gruesome animal sacrifices substantiated the rumors and prompted local law enforcement officials to launch investigations. Detective Alan Alves was tasked with investigating the strange activity.
We used to patrol the state forest, and we used to come across these people in robes and stuff, and the lieutenant used to tell me, oh, those are leftover hippies from the 60s camping out, because I used to see all kind of weird things over there. But then some hunters and people used to go around, we'd find some evidence of satanic graffiti on the rocks and animal bones, and started looking into it, and we learned that it was some ritualistic satanic activity after I discovered it. The activity started getting even worse. We saw dead animals, cruelty to animals and so forth, and stories and rumors of child molestation and even rumors of homicides and so forth.
In the fall of 1979, the ritualistic murders of 2 prostitutes put the investigation in overdrive. Multiple leads revealed that a cult was conducting rituals in the Freetown State Forest.
Detective Alan Sylvia from Fall River and Paul Carey, they did most of that investigation. I was just peripheral on it, but I assisted.
Carey and his partner went undercover to attend a ritual. The investigation ultimately revealed that 17-year-old pimp and prostitute Robin Murphy and 25-year-old pimp Carl Drew were leading followers in bizarre satanic rites. Eventually, Carey interviewed another local prostitute, Karen Marsden. Marsden stated that Drew and Murphy had murdered both prostitutes. Weeks later, Karen Marsden failed to meet with police for a follow-up interview. 6 months after that, her skull was found at a beach in nearby Westport, Massachusetts. In 1980, Carl Drew and Robin Murphy were arrested in connection with the string of murders. Murphy pled guilty to the second-degree murder of Karen Marsden. In exchange for a life sentence with the possibility of parole, Murphy agreed to testify against Drew. In 1982, Drew was convicted in the first degree for the murder of Karen Marsden and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. For years after the convictions, eerie evidence of ritualistic animal sacrifices continued to surface in the Freetown State Forest. In the late 1980s, a series of grave robberies occurred involving small cemeteries in remote sections of the forest.
They were dug up, skulls removed, remains removed. At least 4 or 5 that I know of that we found afterwards.
We're at the Freetown Cemetery, right off of South Main Street here in Assonet, where this mausoleum behind me was broken into, and juveniles actually stole the head out of here.
They broke into the mausoleum and broke into the crypt. They removed the body from the crypt, body of a female, and they cut the head off. They removed it and put it in the car, but as they were driving away, the smell was so bad that they ended up hiding it in the bushes. We ended up arresting 3 juveniles that were involved in that break-in, and they told them they were using it to get into a satanic cult.
When they were caught, the story that one of them told was that they believed that they could gain power by drinking from the skull.
Over the years, more locations have been discovered that are feared to be associated with evil activity. 2 sites in particular, a hidden underground bunker and a remote makeshift hut, cast ominous shadows even today.
A hunter who was walking through the woods discovered an underground bunker. And what this was basically built into a hill. There was an underground lair. It was then covered with a blue tarp and then, of course, all the stuff that you would naturally find in the forest. So unless you approached it from the right angle, you wouldn't be able to tell that there was anything there at all.
If you went to the one side, it was dropped down and you could go inside. And it had some disturbing things in it. There's some dolls with heads cut off, and then a little tiny, tiny chair that a 2-year-old would sit in and looked like they chopped it out of a tree. Had some bindings there and so forth.
It was very clear that whatever was working there was kind of connecting some kind of child abuse and perhaps child abduction with some kind of occult twist to it.
There wasn't anything of any evidentiary material there where we could trace back to any individual group. Persons of interest told me about this hut that supposedly was in the woods that was used by the people involved in the Fall River cult. Witnesses indicated that's where some of the rituals took place. We were led down there. It was at least a 2.5-mile walk into the woods. And there we found the hut, and we found all the trappings of satanic worship, the upside-down pentagram, dolls nailed to the trees and so forth. Apparently it could have been used in the winter because it was made with very insulated material. And it was about the size of a prison cell.
The most recent incident involving occult-like activities in the forest occurred in 1999 when a dozen baby calves were slaughtered.
What began in the forest as pigeons and small animals quickly moved up to larger animals until finally there were cow carcasses being found here.
A huge amount of calves left in the middle of state forest with the absence of blood. And they used that blood in their sacrifices.
What that really signaled to people like Alan Alves and other law enforcement was that things were getting more serious and that perhaps more organized, darker elements were finding their way into the forest.
The cattle mutilations of the late 1990s marked the last known instance of satanic ritual sacrifice in the Freetown State Forest. Within the Freetown State Forest is a Wampanoag Indian reservation, which, like many areas of the Bridgewater Triangle, boasts a long history of paranormal activity related to Native American legends. Elusive pukwudgies are said to roam the woods of the forest. Pukwudgies are 3-foot-tall beings associated with Wampanoag folklore.
Pukwudgies were mischievous and caused the Wampanoags trouble, and everything that went wrong, it was because of the Pukwudgies. It predates the colonialization of the country. It predates even the kind of organizing of the Wampanoag tribe. And then somewhere in the Wampanoags' history, they take this very weird twist where they go from being troublemakers to being labeled as evil. And then eventually, when they begin Christianizing the Wampanoags, being talked of as the foot soldiers of the devil.
Humanistic in their features, Pukwudgies possess enlarged noses, fingers, and ears, and smooth gray skin. They are also said to have magical powers. including the ability to disappear and the ability to glow in the dark.
They control these bursts of light, which are called taipaiwunkas, which today we probably would refer to as orbs. But then they also seem to be controlled by this darker force, this almost shadow-like creature who seems to have control over them, or at least to be observing what they're doing. So I can always tell a Pukwudgie experience from something else because it has those different elements. They're never in isolation with each other.
Pukwudgie sightings in the Freetown State Forest share striking similarities with William Russo's unexplained creature encounter.
Whatever it wasn't young, but it was speaking. I mean, it definitely speaking, and it kept saying, "Ewan Chu, Ewan Chu," got more insistent, and it started beckoning me. "Here, here, Ewan Chu." It wasn't threatening me, but what was weird, it wasn't advancing to me. It didn't come near me. My best guess is, Ewan Chu is, "We want you. We want you. Here, here, come here, come here." I think it was speaking English.
Although William Russo's sighting took place 20 miles to the north, some paranormal researchers are now wondering if Russo may have actually come across a Pukwudgie. In May of 2008, a bizarre incident was caught on camera. Paranormal investigators believe the woman in the following clip was possessed by a Pukwudgie.
Oh, come on, Maureen. Oh, crap. Don't let her go back too far, Ron.
Don't let her get near the water.
Yeah.
No, no.
Maureen.
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 Go holy water.
Maureen.
Leave this body. Andrew, leave this body. It's not your own. Leave, come in. Leave. Leave it. Leave the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Leave this body. Leave it. Leave it. Push him out.
According to the camera operator, a strange light was later seen in the distance as Maureen recovered from the alleged attack. Paranormal researchers often debate the validity of the Bridgewater Triangle's traditional borders.
The original boundaries, as described by Loren Coleman, made for a nice, tidy triangle based on his research. But in the years since, the more people have talked about the Bridgewater Triangle and the more that they've shared stories and experiences, we've seen that the triangle has to expand.
To me, the geographic boundaries of it are kind of a framework for looking at it and trying to identify areas within the triangle where anomalous phenomena are commonly reported. And certainly there are areas that are immediately adjacent to the boundaries of the Bridgewater Triangle that have a very high level of activity with a lot of sightings. But there are also areas within the established boundaries of the triangle where there's a very low level of activity.
It's not a completely straight line that defines this region. It spreads. And when you talk about legendary areas, it's always going to spread. You know, a legend may start in one little tiny parcel of land, but the sightings, the region is going to grow over time. That's just a natural process of legends. People have experiences elsewhere, and it ties back to the original source.
Now it's to the point where I almost wonder if there even is a triangle anymore, that it's just an ever-reaching tentacle that as each year passes and more activity takes place and more people are paying attention to it, those tentacles just start to reach out further and further. Who knows, you know, the Bridgewater Triangle could eventually encompass the entire world.
How the strange events within the Bridgewater Triangle all tie together remains a mystery to this day.
When I was first investigating the sightings here, it seemed to me like there would be so many Bigfoot sightings and UFO sightings and ghosts and monsters and creatures and aliens. It had to be that the Bridgewater Triangle was some kind of a vortex or a portal. But you know, over the years, I've kind of taken a different view of it, and now I think maybe it's just that in our 21st century lives, we're kind of divorced from the natural world around us in a lot of ways, and going into the Freetown State Forest and going into the wilderness of the Hockomock Swamp, that something inside us responds to that, maybe in a way that harkens back to our Stone Age ancestors. And maybe that's what ties it all together.
Years ago, my brother and I, we went and stayed in the Amazon rainforest in Peru. And the shamans there believe that the jungle itself has a spirit, has a soul. And I think that the Hockomock is one of those places. I feel as though the Hockomock has its own soul. It's a very old soul, and it has a memory. And some of the things that it's experienced, such as King Philip's War, I feel as though it holds those memories. And every now and then, when someone goes out into the swamp, they experience something through the swamp.
When you're looking at the Bridgewater Triangle, nothing can be isolated. All of these things are interconnected, and that's really the initial force that drove Coleman. So for us to ever fully understand what's going on in the Bridgewater Triangle, we have to look at it through a cryptozoological lens. We have to look at it through a ufology lens. We have to look at it through a ghostly lens, because only when we kind of evaluated the area through all of those different perspectives and combine our evidence and combine what we found and be open to the fact that those things might kind of all be playing on the same thing, that we're ever going to really understand what's going on in the triangle.
You can't look at the Bridgewater Triangle as just an area where there's paranormal activity. You have to look at the underlying layers of all the history, all of the geological factors, and the more people who are studying it, the more we're actually going to be documenting. So is it just a case of we're documenting more here because it's been brought into the limelight, or is it a case where there really is just more activity here for us to document?
I really modestly and humbly came up with this name, and I'm just as surprised 30 years later that it's such a worldwide phenomenon.
The Bridgewater Triangle, being an area filled with paranormal activity, obviously makes it very special, in my opinion.
The Bridgewater Triangle is definitely a haunted location. Every time I record, there's always something that gets picked up without question.
The Bridgewater Triangle is real. There's no question in my mind. The weirdest things happen here, the most unexplained things happen here, and you can feel it in that state forest.
I don't believe in the Bridgewater Triangle. I accept it.